You should see a recording button on your side.
I do.
Good. Well, this is Marshall, and I'm on with fellow Planet X researcher Dan Dean. Dan, welcome to Cut to the Chase.
Thank you, Marshall. I really appreciate you having me on this evening.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you're here because you are just an amazing researcher. You've helped me so many times getting into wisdom texts and, well, just oddball things. I mean, I really enjoyed the ongoing discussion you and I had about the Lost Book of Enki. And that was a real eye-opener. Boy, once you see things from Enki's point of view, the world gets mighty interesting. Although I wasn't particularly enamored by the Anunnaki seem to have this stuck idea of trying to exterminate us. But that's another conversation, another time. Today we're talking about September 23, 2017, and the possibilities that could arise from this very auspicious day. And for me, the most amazing thing about September 23 is that people are going to look up. And when they look up, they're more likely to see something, which means I'm more likely to get really good observation reports, like the one that I got from Amber, that I just put up that video. And wow,
it's pretty spectacular.
It is spectacular, and you really have to strain to be in denial after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Amber Williamson really knocked it out of the ballpark. And I'm just thinking maybe on September 23, we have Ambers all over the place. And if that happens, wow, what a watershed event. So
a lot of people are looking at that date right now and have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of people who are trying to be catastrophicists about it, but it's a very interesting date to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and I want to talk about it because I'm excited that the day is going to get people looking at the sky. I don't care what gets them looking at the sky as long as they're looking. But that being said, I really need to understand what's going to motivate these people to, take time out of their day, either around sunset or sunrise, go out and see what they're going to see. So with that, what's September 23 all about, Dan?
Well, Marshall, it started in about 96 AD with a gentleman named John, who had been exiled to an island called Patmos.
Mm-hmm.
And he was asked by the disciples of the Judeo-Christian 12 disciples that we speak of, said, hey, everybody's asking about when is this Messiah going to be coming back, because there was a lot of talk about it. And he basically talked with God, and God showed him in some visions. And one of those visions was a great sign in the heavens, is what it's called. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed in the sun, and the moon at her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, we're talking about a sign in the heavens, and we're not talking about something here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Signs to them typically meant sun, moon, stars. They were meant for seasons and signs. And so this particular sign is going to actually take place on September 23rd of 2017, or one particular scenario for it. It's going to occur in the constellation of Virgo.
Mm-hmm.
And Virgo is going to have the sun over her left shoulder, so she's going to be clothed in the sun, and she's going to have a new moon, crescent moon, under her left foot. So the moon's going to be under her foot, and she's going to have 12 stars above her head. She's going to have the 9 main stars of the constellation of Leo, plus Venus, Mars, and Mercury, making a total of 12 stars. So that's what it's all about. They're very excited about this particular sign being fulfilled on September the 23rd, because there's a lot of literature that says that is that ushers in a very important event. This event is known as the Great Tribulation or the 7 years of tribulation. Many different religions and sects have their versions of that. I think it's very important for you and I because, in my opinion, it absolutely includes Nemesis in it. It's part of it.
Wow.
So there's more to it. She's giving, it says, and she is with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And this is actually Jupiter that is transiting the womb of Virgo toward the moon. There's another good continuation of the story about how there's a great dragon that attempts to poise itself to eat the child whenever it's born, but that it's caught away from the dragon and taken back up into the heavens, which is Jupiter in retrograde, where it actually stops before it hits the dragon, reverses, goes back into the heavens, and then continues its transit. So this is what all the excitement's about, because this verse happens to come out of Revelation text, out of the Judeo-Christian Bible, the canonized Bible, in chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And so people put a lot of impact, a lot of importance on this sign, ushering in what is going to occur in Revelations. And
Can I ask you, on this alignment that we have, I have seen different ideas posited about 6,000 years or other times. When was the last time this specific kind of alignment appeared in the sky?
Interestingly enough, September the 11th of 3 BC, this sign appeared with the Bethlehem star, which was heralding in the birth of the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. The difference was that at that time, Jupiter was conjunct with Regulus, which is the brightest star in Leo. It's the king star. And Venus was in the face of Virgo, and Mercury was conjunct with Spica, which is the brightest star at the bottom of Virgo. So it was a different setup. She didn't have a crown of 12 stars when she was heralding the birth of Christ, but the moon was at her feet, and the sun was middle of the chest, and Jupiter was up with Regulus. And so she did have this same sign with the sun and the moon, but she just didn't have the crown of 12 stars. And Jupiter did go into retrograde during that period of time as well, and became conjunct with Venus, which, according to some people, was the Bethlehem star that the wise men saw. So, to our knowledge, that's the only other time that it's occurred.
Okay, that brings a question to my mind that the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament alike, that this first alignment that you're talking about 3 years before the birth of Yeshua was something that the authors of the Bible themselves wouldn't have seen. This would have been generations in advance of that. And how do you think they could foresee this specific kind of alignment?
Well, as you know, in our conversations about the Lost Book of Enki, there would have been either angelic information, who are beings that are otherworldly and have been around for countless millions of years perhaps, and have knowledge of these star conjunctions and events. Or it could be perhaps, as in the Lost Book of Enki, another group of people or of beings that are visiting us, teaching us about things, because they're so far in advanced of where we are at the time.
Interesting, because that would then parallel when I look at deluge accounts. I mean, there's like almost, I think, 150 of them around the world in folklore and tradition. And there's a consistent theme that there is some sort of intervention initially. In the Colburn Bible, the story of Sesuda and Hanok, you have the mysterious visitors. With Noah and the flood, God is talking to Noah. In other words, there's an external awareness that comes to whoever the key protagonist in that flood story is going to be. So is that what you're saying? This could be along those lines?
This could be the Christ or the Messiah prophecy would have probably come along those lines. The John revelation from Patmos in 96 AD was probably a spiritual vision that John had, a communication by a telepathic communication, probably from an angel that was telling him what was to come in the future. Because these angels, you have to understand, have been around millions and some of them billions of years, and they've seen a lot and they know a lot, and we just don't know anything compared to what they've seen or know. And
Okay.
they try to help us out occasionally.
And an angel, excuse me for asking if this gets you into trouble, but an angel could be a benign species that it's interceding?
An angel could be a higher species of being than us that would have certain capabilities such as telegenesic, telepathic, telekinetic capabilities that we do not inherently have in our genes. And they would have an allegiance that has been sworn to paradise. And of course, there were fallen angels as well in Judeo-Christian theology that visited Earth and created the Nephilim. So it could, we could have very well had encounters with some of these fallen angels as well that visited Earth and gained a lot of knowledge from them.
So then what I gather from you is that this is just not somebody racing off with a few ideas about some scriptural passages. You're seeing something much deeper and far more profound.
That is my opinion.
Okay.
This is something that's been planned and seen for a long time, and a celestial, which is kind of a universal language, a celestial sign was given as the demarcation and beginning of certain events, such as the Bethlehem star. And there are 3 particular signs that I'd like to talk about tonight even.
Please.
Okay. Well, the first of which we just discovered and discussed about the Revelation 12 sign, I guess the first thing we have to ask is it the birth of the Messiah? Is that what he was talking about? Because we had a dragon that was trying to eat the child, which would have been Jesus being born. The dragon would have been King Herod trying to kill the child, which he killed every child under the age of 2 in his kingdom, trying to kill the Christ child when he found out about it. So is it that particular sign? Is it talking about the birth of Jesus? I don't think so, because the conjunctions in 3 BC did not have a crown of 12 stars. And we do have a crown of 12 stars here on September the 23rd. What is interesting, which I will talk about later, is that September 11th of 3 BC was 1 Tishri, which is a Jewish month, beginning of the year, of a feast called Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets. The 23rd of September this year happens to be the Feast of Trumpets and Rosh Hashanah as well. So it's very interesting that it happens to occur on that particular feast, Jewish feast, and considering that this is coming from, at the time, Jewish heritage, because that's all there was before the Messiah.
You know, Dan, I got to tell you, I've come to figure out, if you want to know the date for the next Jewish holiday, ask a Christian.
Well, some of them I think still actually practice.
Yeah.
So anyway, in my opinion, this is a unique sign, Marshall. This is not the sign of the Messiah in his birth, but of the return of the Messiah, because that's what this sign ushers in. Is it relevant? I think so. I think it's very relevant for us today if, and I'm going to put a big if on there, if this is the sign that Revelations 12 is talking about. Because we could put, 3 other planets in Leo, and with Jupiter in transit and the sun and moon, and it would work as well. But that doesn't come around very often. I mean, this is the next occurrence, 2000 and however, 20 years later now, after 3 BC, that this comes about again. But this time we've got a crown of 12 stars, which matches that Revelation 12. So, in my opinion, this is a very good candidate for the Revelation 12 sign. I believe it meets all of the criteria. So if it is the one, then I think it's going to usher in some very important events that everyone in the world is going to want to know about. I think that a couple other things to think about. John, who was asked to talk about the return of the Messiah, saw a vision, which was the book of Revelations, which is about the return of the Messiah, not about his birth. So that's a second reason why I think that this sign would be different and set apart from the birth of the Messiah. And then, of course, I like this particular saying that Jesus says in Matthew 24, 6 through 8, you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But these are merely the beginning of birth pains. Isn't that interesting about Jupiter and a story of a woman giving birth and being in birth pains? So let's talk about what is the sign of this? What is it the sign of? What is this 7-year tribulation we're talking about? It's a very difficult time for the earth and for its inhabitants, where there's war. It talks about famine and cosmic disturbances, great earthquakes, fire, hailstones from the heavens, disease, death, darkness, etc. In the middle of it, there's something called the ingathering of people from the earth to the heavens. And then there's a new permanent membership in the kingdom of heaven after being taken away from the dragon of old, which is a, in quote, dragon of old. I think it's the culmination of a story that started a very long time ago. In the Urantia, there's a story, and we could call it a Star Wars story if you want to.
Okay.
235,000 years ago, a rebellion occurred in the heavens, and a regent angel called Lucifer didn't agree with the prince and ruler of the universe, as we know as Jesus here, are also called the only begotten Son. And he debated for a long time with the angel Gabriel, and finally declared independence from the laws of paradise, which is where his allegiance had laid his entire existence. At that time, he and a third of the angels under his charge, along with the area of galaxy that he was responsible for, became disconnected altogether from paradise. They were just disjoint, no more communication, no more envoys. And this little planet called Earth was, unfortunately, a part of that separated region in space. So for 235,000 years, there's been a plan that has been in formation from paradise to regain the control of our planet and rejoin all the planets that were cast out or disjoint to be restored to paradise. This 7-year event is the culmination of that plan. It's the restoration of Earth into the great family of the paradise members. And so that's what this story is about, from the Judeo-Christian and many other religions. That's the perspective, that this is just the culmination of that big story that's been going on for a very long period of time. The 7 years before the restoration seem to be intentionally timed with certain cyclical cosmological events unique to our solar system that we were talking about, because as we see, we're going to see some very serious things that are going to occur that can only be caused by cosmological events.
I agree with that. And one thing that interests me is the difference between a harbinger and an event. And a classic case of that is the Mayan calendar. Now, there are a lot of people that think that that was a lot of nonsense and people made a lot of foolish mistakes to follow that. And it wasn't until a few years after that another researcher, J.P. Jones, and I started taking a look at things and saying, well, was December 21, 2012 a celestial alignment that indicated a harbinger? And a harbinger event is not a catastrophic event. It's an event that says you are on the timeline of a catastrophic event.
Right.
And when we started looking at two data sets in particular, one would be earthquakes of all magnitudes, and the other was going to be fireballs. And literally, it was right after December 21, 2012, both of those data sets, it just took off. It reminded me of the, Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote lights the Acme rocket and zooms straight up.
Yeah.
The rocket is still going. The coyote is still riding. And the data has not dipped down, so we're not seeing variability. We're seeing this increasing trend on both data sets of earthquakes and with meteors, particularly fireballs. So what we know about that is December 21, 2012 was a Mayan harbinger event, and that the only real numbers to see out of anything before that was how much the cable companies made off their programming.
Yeah.
And they made an awful lot. But I remember when I was interviewed by National Geographic in August of 2012, and they're going, do you see a direct connection with Planet X? And I said, no, don't see anything. It's coincidental. And they said, what are you doing on December 21, 2012? And I said, making coffee. And I took my coffee mighty seriously. And they didn't like those answers, so I did a big play on the show. But my prediction was right. Now, with all that in mind, let's look at September 23. And the one thing I'm always worried about are expectation stampedes, where people think something on that day is going to happen and it's going to be immense and profound and the whole world is going to quake. But that's not the way a harbinger works.
No, it's not. And this is a harbinger.
This is a harbinger event.
It is.
So what do you expect that we're going to see on September 23?
Some beautiful stars in the sky. The possible fulfillment of a almost 2,000-year-old prophecy that many sects of people around the world have been looking for to be fulfilled. And there was a lot that had to happen before that, and it would be a good time. It's the right time for this harbinger event, but I'm not saying for sure that this is the correct sign, but it is certainly one that is an excellent candidate for it.
All right. So September 23 comes, there's nothing earth-shaking that happens. But then again, December 21, 2012, nothing earth-shaking happened, and the data sets afterwards told us we were in a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
So
things are going to happen.
This may or may not be. This may or may not be. Okay. It's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get next. But let's assume it is. What's the first thing that we're going to see or know about that's going to tell us, well, that was the real harbinger event? How are we going to know? We got our data sets for the Mayan calendar. What are the data sets for September 23?
Okay. I need to cover a couple of things before I can start talking about those, so I can introduce to those who may be new to the show the existence of some facts that they need to know. For instance,
all right,
about 85% of the stars in our galaxy are a part of a binary or a trinary star system. That is, they are 2 or 3 stars that actually orbit around each other. We are no different. We actually have not a twin star, but a second star that we revolve around in a very elongated orbit. It happens to be a brown dwarf star. The brown dwarf, I believe, is about the size of Jupiter. It was once an ignited star, shone brilliantly, but it lacked the size and mass to sustain fusion. Right. And so it originally, it snuffed out at some point in its existence. Still now, red glowing iron core of a former sun called a brown dwarf star. It does have a protoplanetary cloud of iron oxide and dense dust particles. And we believe that it has its own 7 planets, 3 inner and 4 outer. And these are in random orbital planes, each different, unlike our own solar system, which are all planar. They're all in pretty much the same plane, except for Pluto, maybe. So that's one thing we have to understand, is that we do have
Mm-hmm.
second sun that we visit ever so often. However often that is, it exists out there.
Okay.
We have three accounts, at least, of this close proximity of this star in the Colburn, for instance. In the Colburn, it's called the Red Dragon, or the Destroyer, or the Doom Shape, or the Frightener.
Mm-hmm.
It affects certain effects that it produces are boils and burning of the skin, trees and grass becoming white as ashes with heat, the oceans moving from their positions and traveling over the land, the earth opening up and belching out fire and ash, mountains being leveled and new mountains arising as though the land were constantly moving, great hailstones from the sky, the stars falling from the earth as meteors, red dust is everywhere, days of darkness, of foul stench that can be tasted and felt, asteroids plummeting into the earth and becoming part of the planet, and great weather disturbances, including lightning, rain, earthquakes, and etc. So those are all part of the passing of this destroyer, the red dragon, the doom shape, or this brown dwarf. The plagues of Egypt in 1450 BC was the last time that I think we saw the brown dwarf. The plagues that we just mentioned right there were 9 of the plagues that we saw that Egypt suffered during the exodus of the Hebrews. And you did a work on that, and I think it was a very masterful work about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's when we look at the plagues of Exodus and you reorganize them in scientific progression as opposed to allegorical, wow. I mean, the dots really do connect. But on the other hand, it taught me something about allegory in the Bible that I really admire. And that is, if you have to send knowledge across a span of many, many generations and to future generations that have no point of reference whatsoever to what you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
Allegory is the perfect vehicle. And when I'm looking at what's coming in the next tribulation, actually, I see something that's more of a fusion between the worst of Exodus and Noah's flood. That's what I see coming in this next event. And but still the same, I have become quite an admirer of the power of allegory.
I would love to read the entire chapter 6 out of the book of manuscripts. I don't know if I have time to do that.
Go right ahead.
Well,
we're going
let
to
me
roll
try to
with
get
this.
through
We've
some
got to
highlights of it here. This is and now let's talk about the Colburn real quick to give the listeners some background.
Mm-hmm.
When the Hebrews exited slavery from Egypt in about approximately 1450 BC,
Mm-hmm.
the Egyptians got their butts kicked so bad, and they lost all confidence in their own gods that they had been worshiping, that they had a whole plethora of them, and they were just enamored and baffled by who this God of the Hebrews were.
Right.
So the Pharaoh sent out scribes for 7 years to collect all of the known wisdom in the entire known world about this God of the Hebrews.
Right.
And they came back with this big set of books that was about the size of an encyclopedias that they called the Great Book. Mm-hmm. Later, in trying to preserve the bindings, it was bronze bound and came to be known as the Bronze Book. And then during the Dark Ages, the 1400s, we had a lot of kingships and clergy that were trying to suppress knowledge from the people. A lot of the book was destroyed, and we have a remnant that was, of course, brought to you some years ago and is now reprinted as what we call the Colburn. So that's the background of it. And so this came from firsthand accounts, especially of the Hebrews exiting from Egypt. And this particular chapter is about that Exodus that we read about in the book of Exodus in the canonized Judeo-Christian Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So I begin reading here, and it talks about the doom shape called the Destroyer in Egypt, was seen in all the lands thereabouts. Its color, it was bright and fiery in appearance, changing and unstable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like water bubbling in a pool from an underground supply, and all men agree it was the most fearsome sight. It was not a great comet or a loosened star, but more like a fiery body of flame.
Mm-hmm.
Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face it hid. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed as it passed along its course. It caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with gray cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became molted with sores. Does any of this sound familiar so far?
Oh, man.
Okay, the earth was troubled with shock. The hills and the mountains moved and rocked. The dark, smoke-filled heavens bowed over earth, and a great bowl came to the ears of the living men, borne to them upon the wings of the wind. It was the cry of the Lord, the dark Lord, they call it, the master of dread. Thick clouds of fiery smoke passed before him, and there was an awful hail of hot stones and coals of fire. More things we're familiar with here. The doom shape thundered sharply in the heavens and shot out bright lightnings, the channel of water, which turned back unto themselves when the land tilted, and the great trees were tossed about and snapped like twigs. Do you remember the earthquake of the New Madrid Fault in Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, in the 1800s, whenever the Mississippi River flowed backwards for 3 days?
Rang the
That must
church.
have been quite a sight to watch the whole river run backwards for 3 days.
That's right. And it rang.
We're talking about rivers running backwards because the earth is changing its terrain. It's geoshaping. Then a voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness, and before its burning breath the flames parted. The whole of the land moved, and mountains melted. The sky itself roared like 10,000 lions in agony, and bright arrows of blood sped back and forth across the face. Earth swelled up like a bread upon the hearth. Now that's an interesting statement. This was the aspect of the doom shape called the destroyer when it appeared in days long gone by in olden times. It is thus described in the old records, few of which remain. It is said that it appears in the heavens above. Earth splits open from the heat, like a nut roasted before the fire. Then flames shoot up through the surface and leap about like fiery fiends upon black blood. The moisture inside the land is all dried up, and pastures and cultivated places are consumed in flames. Going down here, it starts talking about the dark days when the last visitation of the destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the skies, and the men were silent and went about with pale faces. The leaders of the slaves, and this is the Hebrews we're talking about, that the Egyptians had in slavery, which had built a city to the glory of Thom, stirred up unrest, and no man raised his arm against them. They foretold great events of which the people were ignorant, and of which the temple seers were not informed. So here's this man called Moses, this prince priest, that is talking about things that the Pharaoh and his seers had never heard about, and didn't believe, didn't think it had anything to do with anything, because nobody had ever heard about it. So they were just blowing smoke because they wanted free. Okay. So these were the days of, there were first days of ominous calm when the people waited for what they knew not. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. Laughter was heard no more, and grief and waiting sounded throughout the land. Even the voices of children were stilled. The slaves became bold and insolent. This is a good opinion of the Egyptians toward these slaves who are now becoming bold and insolent because they want freedom. Fear walked the land, and women became barren with terror. They could not conceive, and those with child aborted, and men chose up or closed up within themselves. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens, and the people became as frightened beasts without herdsmen, and asses without lions prowl without their fold. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and reckless men said, if we knew where this God were to be found, we'd sacrifice to him. But the God of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamp lands or the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see, but they did not see with understanding, nor would any God listen, for all were dumb because of the hypocrisy of men. The dead were no longer sacred and were thrown into the waters. Those already entombed were neglected, and many became exposed. They lay unprotected against the hands of the thieves. He who once toiled long in the sun, bearing the yoke for himself, now possessed oxen. He who grew no grain now owned a storehouse full. He who once dwelt at ease among the children now thirsted for water. He who once sat in the sun with crumbs and dregs was now bloated with food. He reclined in the shade, his bowls overflowing. Cattle were left unattended to roam into strange pastures, and men ignored their marks and slew the beasts of their neighbors. No man owned anything. Public records were cast forth, and people lent deaf ears to people in distress. There were those who spoke falsely. The priests were not helping at all. They went into hiding. Dust and smoke clouds darkened the sky and colored the waters, upon which they fell with bloody hue. That's important. Plague was throughout the land, and the river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. The water was vile, and men's stomachs shrank from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore at the skin of man and beast. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. Vermin bred and filled the air and filled the earth with loathsomeness. Wild beasts afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and moans of cattle. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb or fruit was to be found. The face of the land was battered and devastated by the hails of stones, which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down not in hot showers. They swept down in hot showers, and strange flowing fire ran along the ground in the wake. The fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Great gusts of wind brought swarms of locusts which covered the sky. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. The gloom of the long night spread a dark mantle of blackness which extinguished every ray of light. None knew when it was day or when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but the thick darkness in which the breath of men was stopped in their throats. Men gasped in the hot cloud of vapor which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all the lamps. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in the beds. None spoke to another or took food, for they were overwhelmed with despair. Ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools, and it was time of undoing. The earth turned over, and clay spun as clay spun under the potter's wheel. The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. There was a sound of moaning and lamentation on every side. The earth spewed up its dead. Corpses were cast up out of the resting places, and embalmed were revealed to the sight of all men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. I'm going to jump on down here a little bit. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved in pain, rent her bowels. Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and the statues of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in the fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from the hail were swallowed when the earth split open. The habitations of men collapsed. The land writhed under the wrath of the destroyer and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself in the temples and the palaces, and the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. There were 9 days of darkness and upheaval, when the tempest raged such as never had been known before. When it passed away, brother buried brother throughout the land. Men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. The slaves spared by the destroyer left the accursed land forthwith. Their multitude moved in the gloom of a half dawn under the mantle of fine swirling gray ash, leaving the burnt fields and shattered cities behind them. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host, For one who was great led them forth, a priest prince in the inner courtyard. We're talking about Moses there. 5, a fire mounted up on high, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung in the curtain of the sky. In 7 days by Remor, the accursed ones journeyed to the waters. They crossed the heaving wilderness, notice that, while the hills melted around them. Above, the skies were torn with lightning. They were sped by terror, and their feet became entangled, and the land and the wilderness shut them in. They knew not which way they were going, for no sign was constant before them. They turned before Nashari and stopped at Shakath, the place of quarries. They passed the waters of Maha and came to the valley of Pikaroth, northward of Mara. They came up against the waters which blocked their way, and their hearts were in despair. We know this is the Red Sea. The night was a night of fear and dread, for there was a high moaning above, and black winds from the underworld were loosed, and spring fire up from the ground. The hearts of the slaves shrank within them, for they knew the wrath of Pharaoh followed them, and that there was no way of escape. They hurled abuse on those who led them, strange rites, and performed along the shore that night. The slaves disputed among themselves, and there was violence. You don't hear any of that in the Judeo-Christian version of the Exodus, but this is a first-hand account of people who were there, who wrote it right after it occurred.
That's
Pharaoh
right.
had gathered his army and followed the slaves, and after he departed, there were riots and disorders behind them, for the cities were plundered. The laws were cast out in the judgment halls and trampled underfoot in the streets. Pharaoh pressed in on his sorrow, and behind him with all desolation and death. So here he is out here going before this really fearful cosmological event and disturbances, the geoterrestrial disturbances.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't go back because of all the terror that was going on in the town. So, because there was nothing left, so he pressed forward. The host of the Pharaoh came upon the slaves by the saltwater shores, but he was held back by the breath of the fire. A great cloud was spread over the hosts and darkened the sky. None could see except the fiery glow of the unceasing lightnings which rent the covering cloud overhead. This is giving a good idea of what a passing is like here.
Yeah, that's exactly what is going through my mind as you're reading it, and I'm seeing it. I'm going, oh boy, is that going to leave a mark?
Yeah, it is. Whirlwind arose in the east and swept over the encamped host. A gale raged all night, and in the red twilight dawn, there was a movement on the earth. The waters receded from the seashore and were rolled back on themselves. There was a strange silence, and then in the gloom, it was seen that the waters had parted, leaving a passage between. The land had risen, but it was disturbed and trembled. The way was not straight or clear. The waters about were if spun within a bowl. The swampland alone remained undisturbed. From the horn of the destroyer came a high, thrilling noise which stopped the ears of men. The slaves had been making sacrifice in despair. Their lamentations were loud. Now before them the strange sight. There was a hesitation of doubt, but the space of breath that stood still silent. Then all was confusion and shouting, some pressing forward into the waters against all sought to flee back from the unstable ground. Then exultation. Their leader led them into the midst of the waters through the confusion, yet many sought to turn back into the host behind them, while others fled along the empty shores. So I'm going to kind of make this, paraphrase this. The Egyptians, over this tumultuous terrain of rising and lowering land between huge swirling waters, because this land is up higher than the water, okay? Mm-hmm. And there's like whirlpools on either side of the sea, and they're trying to make their way across something that's extremely scary, and a lot of confusion's going on, and Egypt's army's right behind them, and they get to the other side, and Egypt decides, okay, this is really crazy, all these things that are going on, but I gotta go. So they went across, and they started making war with the very tail end of the Hebrews. And at that particular time, the land collapsed again, and all the waters flowed back on, in and covered Pharaoh's armies and a few Hebrews. But the destroyer descended upon the hosts, and the heavens roared as with 1,000 thunders, and the bowels of the earth were sundered, and earth shrieked in agony. The cliffs were torn away and cast down. The dry ground fell beneath the waters, and great waves broke upon the shore, sweeping in rocks from seaward. And it goes on to talk more firsthand about what it was like to be there, to watch this exodus and the effects of this thing, this destroyer that was passing them by in the sky. And so with that, I'd like to kind of show you we do have this second son, and if and when we ever come in close proximity to it, which we have in the past, it's not a pretty story. It's pretty scary in various degrees of effect that it might have upon us.
Right.
In the ancient archives of the Book of the Creations in the Kolbrin, they talk about the earth being destroyed and God having to remake it anew. And in the story of Genesis 1 and 2, it says that in the beginning, that God created the earth from nothing, and the earth became void and destroyed, and God had to recreate it. And this is a very similar one, but it was destroyed by what they called the Great Red Dragon in the sky. That was their term for it.
Mm-hmm.
This is most likely, in my experience, I've been studying this for 25 years now, Marshall, and this is most likely the cosmological event spoken of in the Judeo-Christian Bible in many places, including in Revelations.
Wow.
The overview of the 7 years is we have great sign in the heavens, which is this woman. And then we have 7 seals and 7 trumpets and 7 bowls of plagues. And we're going to talk about it, but the 7 trumpets and those 7 bowls of plagues are just like what we just got through reading out of the Kolbrin. At the end of it, the good news is there's a return of the Messiah at the end of the 7 years.
Well, there has to be something to clean up the mess, to be honest.
Yeah. And it will probably be a mess.
It is going to be really, really awful. And I mean, the thing about the Kolbrin Bibles, it reads like a man on the street interview. And, you know, there's nothing airy-fairy about it. It just lays it right out. The Egyptians are very explicit because the bronze book that you're talking about was actually part of the Great Book, which was 20 volumes. And the bronze book is all that survives from it. And it was essentially their 9/11 report. They were trying to figure out how did these, slaves that whip us? I mean, how did their God whip their pantheon of gods?
Exactly.
And they were trying to find out, which they actually never did. But they invested a great deal of time and went throughout the entire breadth of their trading realm. So during the day, the scribes were counting bricks and making payments, but at night they were interviewing elders and reading wisdom texts and reporting back. And that is really what the Great Book brought. It was an immense amount of wealth from that region. And I think there's one book, the Sons of Fire, which I think is the last remaining vestige of Phoenician folklore.
It's a very good book.
Absolutely, it is. What I'd like to do now is let's really get into the 7-year tribulation. And the reason why, all right, is if September 23 is what the folks say it is, then we're facing a 7-year tribulation. And we've already, the Kolbrin version kind of like is the movie trailer of all movie trailers.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all consistent with my prediction of a decade-long tribulation. And I think the difference between 7 and 10 years is that I factor in a lot more crustal settling where we're past the major events, but then we're going to have a lot of earthquakes as the plates realign. earth trumpets,
Volcanoes, yeah.
yeah, volcanoes. We're going to have a lot of problems. It'll carry on. So it's an arbitrary cut as to whether it's 7 or 10. It's still going to be a rough time. But what I'd like for you to do now is, in light of September 23, describe that 7-year tribulation for us.
Okay. Well, let me give you the high points of it real quick, and then I'll go into the detail and explain them all, but I want to give you the breadth of what we're talking about first. First, we have the great sign of heaven, which is the woman clothed in the sun. And then we have 7 seals. And the first seal is this white horseman who rides out. And then there's a second seal, and there's a red horseman that rides out. Third seal is a black horseman, and the fourth seal is a pale or dappled horseman. And then it changes. The fifth seal is this thing called the abomination of desolation, and we'll talk about what that is. Then there's another big sign, another great sign in the heavens of a red dragon, a great red dragon of old. And then we have the sixth seal, which is the arrival of the cosmological entourage of events, of this cosmological event that we talked about, that we just read about in the Colburn. Then we have the seventh seal, which is the 7 trumpets, which is very interesting. The seventh seal and the 7 trumpets actually will occur on Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, of some particular year. We'll talk about that too, of a possible timeline. So the first trumpet opens up. We have hail and fire mixed with blood. Third of the earth is burned up. Second trumpet, great mountain thrown into the sea. Third of the sea becomes blood. Third trumpet, wormwood meteor strikes a third of the freshwater sources. They turn to blood. Fourth trumpet, a third of the day and night become dark, no visible lights. Fifth trumpet, star from heaven opens the bottomless pit. And this star is synonymous with angel. It's the same word used in the text. And then sixth trumpet, army of 200 million from the east. And then the seventh trumpet, there's reapers. There are 2 reapers that are interesting in the seventh trumpet, and the 7 bowls of plagues are to be announced in the seventh trumpet. And then there's another great sign in the heavens of 7 angels and 7 plagues. And then we have the first plague, which is boils and sores on the skin. And then the second plague, which is sea becomes red like blood. Third plague is fresh water becomes red like blood. Fourth plague is scorched men with fire and fierce heat. Fifth plague is darkness. Sixth plague, Euphrates rivers dries up, making way for the army of the east to advance. And the seventh plague is the great war gathering, the greatest of earthquakes the earth has ever known, great hailstones, every mountain moved from its place, and then the second reaping and the Messiah's return. And we see the Messiah coming in with an army of angels riding on white horses, and they throw the beast and the prophet in the fire, and the remainder of them are killed. So that's kind of the story that we're going to go through here. And I'm going to start with who the horsemen are, because we already know what the great sign in the heaven is.
Before you do that,
yes, sir.
I caught you said an army of 200 million?
Yes, sir.
Well, when that was written, there was the entire global population was less than 300 million.
Indeed.
So how does somebody know that someone can muster a 200 million man army in the future?
We have to start thinking outside of the box of human form into beings that live in a 4th and a 5th dimension, where time is just a picture, and they can see an entire timeline in one big picture. We can't do that. It's hard for us to understand that. But other beings are able to see time as one big picture on the wall, and they can see it all at once. We have to traverse it linearly, one bit at a time, as though we're traveling on a line. They get to see the line from the side, the whole line, in a perspective, and see what happens at any point down the road. And if given this information, and that big angels, powerful angels, are able to do that, they're able to share these things with people who have great interest in knowing, and that dedicate themselves to try to find that out all throughout the Judeo-Christian Bible, throughout many wisdom texts throughout the world. Men who are searching for answers meet beings of stature and capabilities, evolution far beyond themselves, who share with them things that are going to come in the future. So we have to look at this, at John seeing a vision and telepathically communicating with probably an angel who's already been there and knows what's going to happen, and knows that there's going to be however many billions of people on that planet at that particular time.
So another intercession, and I find that most interesting. Yeah, 200 million man army. Wow.
Yep, that's big.
Staggeringly huge. Staggeringly huge. And only someone like China could put something like that together.
Yeah, China, Russia. I mean, they've got 900 million men in the country of China alone, I believe. I heard some number like that.
Yeah, and if their factories are diverted away from Walmart to military.
Yeah, to military, amazing what could happen.
They can do it. Wow. Wow. So this 7-year tribulation phase. Now, in there, we're talking about a lot of the events I talk about in my book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation. I'm really recognizing an awful lot of parallels. However, I come at this from a different position altogether. I don't look at this. I'm just looking at what is the current science telling me. And I'm projecting that out into the future. So I'm not coming at it with this divine intercession. That being said, I think the crux of this really comes back to Nemesis. This is the bad boy. This is the one that's really going to hurt us. And we talk about Planet X, Nibiru. Nibiru is an outermost planet of that system, major planet. There's minor and major planets in that system. I only talk about the 3 major planets. For example, we have like Ceres and Pluto now, which has been demoted. Poor Pluto. Poor Pluto. I always was pulling for Pluto. I don't know why I could love a rock out in the middle of the
frozen rock at that.
Yeah, but we do, so we really feel, oh, poor Pluto, you got killed. But when we're looking at Nemesis events, all right, and what I'm seeing and as I'm projecting out, and this is really going to be in my next books that I'm writing. And I'm seeing 3 specific Nemesis events. One I call Passover, the other I call Pass Outside, and then the other I call it Pass Under. And with Passover, Nemesis, and I would estimate it's probably in size about twice the size diameter of Jupiter. But mass-wise, it has much more mass than Jupiter. And that's the problem for us because of the tidal gravitational forces.
Yeah, it's an iron core instead of a gaseous planet.
That's right. And so Passover is going to occur when it literally is coming out from behind the sun to our side of the solar system, and it goes over our heads. That's one of the things that we're going to hear a lot of disinformation about. Don't worry about it. It's going to go over our heads. Well, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people are going, oh, it's not going to hit us, so, don't worry. And when it's over our heads, when we have the Passover event, when Nemesis is crossing over the orbit of Earth, if you're not really ready for what happens next, if you're not really prepared, if you haven't been awakened to do something, forget it. Your chances of surviving are now going to be infinitesimally small. Then a year later, we're going to come around because Nemesis is in a clockwise orbit. We're in a counterclockwise orbit. So another year, we come around like ships passing in the night. And this will be the pass outside. And Nemesis is going to be around the ecliptic, the plane of our system, between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. And this is when the pole shift event is going to happen. That's the one event that's going to cause more loss of life than all of the other events. And then we're going to make another orbit around the sun, and then the next one will be the pass under. And that's going to be a very difficult time because we're passing through the tail of Nemesis. And that iron oxide is just going to cover the Earth and make a terrible mess of everything.
Yep.
And then after that, then it's going to be going down into the southern skies towards aphelion, its furthest distance from the sun, and then we start picking up the pieces, and that's going to be a difficult process. Throughout this whole thing, it's definitely the end of this civilization. So my focus is really more on a clean slate for the beginning of the next civilization. I'd like to see humanity come out of this and have a Star Trek future. And
before we really discuss those passings and the devastation of Nemesis coming by, I'd like to give a really encouraging word that is perhaps, I think people need to have hope while they're going through bad things. And you know that better than anybody.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'll start with, I had mentioned 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Anytime you ask someone, tell me about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, well, they're these doomsday horsemen that bring in death and famine and war, and they're bad guys, and they're supposedly part of the beast that is trying to destroy people on the earth. And I have a very different perspective of that, and I use Judeo-Christian writings to interpret other Judeo-Christian writings, and let me give a good word of encouragement here. In Zechariah 6, which is one of the Old Testament prophets of the Judeo-Christian Bible, it says that the first chariots, that there are 4 horsemen that are before the presence of the Lord at all times, and that go out to the earth to report back on what's happening. They're like rangers on the earth. The first chariot has a red horse. The second one has a black horse. The third one a white horse, and a fourth one a pale or dappled horse. In the Jewish Talmud and the Zohar, which are the texts that existed long before the Bible, the pale or dappled horse belongs to the angel Michael. He's a good guy. He's a ranger of the south, and he's the ruler of summer of time. And that's going to be important as we get through. The red horse is the angel Raphael. He's the ranger of the east and the ruler of spring. And the white horse is the angel Gabriel, ranger of the west and ruler of autumn. The black horse is the angel Uriel, ranger of the north and ruler of the winter. So these guys are not the bad guys. These are God's guys that are coming in to start taking over the planet, taking over the system that is currently in place. We call it the cabal a lot of time in social media. It's whatever controls the planet, whatever system controls the planet. And they come in and they bring some pretty nasty stuff with them to try to tear down what is called Babylon the Great. They're also known as the angels of the 4 winds and the 4 corners of the earth. They're good guys. Let me just kind of talk about them real quick, if I may. The first seal is the white horse that's broken. And it says, I looked and behold a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. That's Revelation 6:2. This is the angel Gabriel, whose allegiance is to paradise. And this conquering of the planet Earth is for the kingdom of heaven, not for the beast. And the second seal is the red horse. And I saw another horse went out, a red one, and him who sat on it was granted to take peace from the earth. And this is the angel Raphael, whose allegiance is to paradise. And again, he is warring to tear down strongholds of the beast for the kingdom of heaven. The third seal likened is the black horse, and this is famine. He's bringing famine to tear down strongholds of the beast in ushering in the kingdom. And this is the angel Uriel, whose allegiance is to paradise. So this is a good guy. These are very powerful angels. These are 4 of the 7 powerful angels of the apocalypse, or of the tribulation. The fourth is the pale or dappled or ashened horse, and he brings in death, and Hades is right behind him. And so he's going to have to go out and unfortunately kill with the sword and famine and pestilence and by beasts of the earth. But this is the angel Michael, who brings death to the violent, to those who fight against the kingdom of heaven. So again, these 4 guys are not angels of the apocalypse. This is not a story about the beast performing his wrath upon the people of the earth, although he's going to have a lot of backlash and hurt a lot of people. These 4 horses are the beginning of the restoration of the planet into the kingdom of the heavens. After that, we hear about a great war in the heaven, and Michael and his angels are waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no place found for them in the heaven any longer. And the great dragon was thrown down to the earth, and his angels thrown down with him. And it says, now is the salvation and the power and the kingdom of God and the authority of his Christ have come. So they're declaring victory here. It's now our planet, guys. You're done for. I know you have about 3.5 years left, but you're up. Your time is gone. Your rebellion's gone. This planet is now ours. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, which in this case is the Hebrews, it's Israel. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman. It's very interesting that one of those 4 angels is known as the eagle angel, and he has wings, where she could be nourished for times and a half a time, which is 3.5 years, is what, for 42 months in the wilderness. She's going to be given a place to hide. And the serpent poured water out of his mouth after the woman so he might cause her to be swept away with a flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. Now, doesn't that sound like what we just read out of the Colburn that was happening to the Hebrews? The earth opening up and waters flowing over places. Very interesting. It starts making sense in that light.
I have to agree with you, yes.
So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And that would be, in Judeo-Christian language, the Christians, which is the graft that Paul talks about of the Gentiles being grafted into the Jewish Israel nation. Then we get to this thing called the abomination of desolation. There is more controversy about the abomination of desolation. In Matthew 24:16-18, Jesus is actually talking. He says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. That was inserted by James Bacon whenever he did the King James interpretation of the Bible. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the housetop must not go down to get his things that are in his house. Whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But it's a bad thing. He's saying, get out of here, guys. When you see this abomination of desolation, you need to get up to the mountains of Judea. Now, a lot of people say, well, okay, that's those who might consider nemesis coming, say that's nemesis. Except it isn't, because in Luke 21:20, the parallel verse of exactly what he's talking about, this is Luke's account of what Jesus is saying, says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. what the abomination of desolation is it is the utter destruction of Jerusalem. And the people who have not escaped will be killed. And it marks 42 weeks into the tribulation, or the halfway point into the tribulation. It says in Daniel that he, being the Antichrist, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, that is 7 years. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. And if you read the NIV version, it says, on the abomination of desolation it comes. So they're talking about in the middle of the week here, middle of the 7 years, is the abomination of desolation. So Jerusalem is going to be destroyed by surrounding armies. This is after the dragon's been thrown down to earth. Then we have this fifth seal, which is martyrs. And this is the martyrs. This is the people that were killed in Jerusalem. And we're seeing their number of 144,000 in heaven. Then we have this other great sign that we're really interested in. Another great sign in the heavens. It's a red dragon. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads, 10 horns, and his heads were 7 diadems. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour the child. It is a sign in the heavens. We know that. It's not something, it's not metaphorical. It's another one of these signs, just like we've already seen to the birth of Christ, and this one that starts on September 23rd, if that's the correct sign. It's possibly a reference to the red dragon of the book of Creations, chapter 3, that I spoke to you about earlier. This could be Nemesis and its 7 planets. I'm not saying it is, but you have to think about it.
That's exactly what was on my mind as you were talking
So
about.
this could be Nemesis and her 7 planets being the sign in the heavens of the big red dragon having 7 heads. And it'll make a little more sense as we get through some of this cosmological events. About 1/3 of the stars from heaven, we're going to see that 1/3 of the stars are covered during the first passing of this Nemesis. So the 6, and what's interesting is, if that's true, then the very next seal makes a lot of sense, because the 6th seal is the arrival of the Nemesis entourage. But and just to let you know the timing, Jesus said after the destruction of Jerusalem, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And so here is the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Now that sounds like a pole shift. Well, that at least sounds like earth crust displacement to me, which usually occurs during a pole shift.
Well, you're talking about the darkness, and I talk about that in my books, The Days of Darkness, because what will happen is Nibiru is going to pass between us and the sun. And this is a massive
Right, exactly.
So we're going to have an eclipse, but I mean, it is, given the size of it, everything's just going to go absolutely pitch black. It'll be a darkness like we have never known.
I agree.
And yeah, that would cause all of the things that you're describing there. And it's coming between. Also, now there's something else interesting. One of the things that Major Ed Dames, talks about, and he started talking about it back in actually 2004. And I had one of his original kill shot videos that he did back there. And I had a chance to meet Ed and told him I said, wow, back in 2004, you were ahead of the curve, because he was talking about a large planet passing between the sun and Earth. And at the time, I just wasn't far enough in my research to really understand that. But it is going to be Nibiru. And he talks about the kill shot, and what he's actually describing is a solar sprite, or what you could call cosmic lightning.
Yep, I'm
And
surprised.
I think a good example of that is Val Marineris on Mars. A good example of what cosmic lightning can do when the sun reaches out and touches somebody. Now, where in the Seven Seals are you seeing what Ed Dames is talking about, which is a solar sprite or cosmic lightning?
Let's see here real quick. That's a good question. There's lightning constantly throughout. And I'm looking for that specific language. Seventh trumpet. There were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder and an earthquake and a great hailstorm.
Yeah, that'd do it. Yeah, if the great earthquake, because we get hit by a solar sprite, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be an earthquake.
Well, the seventh seal, which comes after the sixth seal, it's the last seal, is the seven trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make a note that it is my opinion, and in Jewish tradition, the seven trumpets will start being blown on the 1st of Tishri, which is the first month of their year, which is Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is blown on the 15th of Tishri, which is called the Feast of Tabernacles.
Mm-hmm.
So we are probably looking at, we have the midpoint, and I'll go through this in a minute, but we've got 3.5 years being the spring of a particular year, and then the autumn of that year will be the start of the seven trumpets. Okay, so that's going to be this passing of Nemesis here. So we have the sixth seal. Okay, the fifth seal is the destruction of Jerusalem. The sixth seal is the beginning of this entourage. And so then we have the seven trumpets. And the seven trumpets, the first one is hail, fire mixed with blood. Obviously, the first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and the green grass was burned up. That's the first thing that happened. So we know it's a third of the earth is being exposed to probably the sun, our sun, due to a lowered electromagnetic field, and solar radiation is just playing havoc on a third 120-degree aperture of the earth. And of course, the iron oxide is mixed with water vapor, causing the blood to come out of the sky. We've got extreme weather distresses causing large hail and meteorites entering the Earth's atmosphere and burning up, and searing heat that burns the earth. So that's the first trumpet. Second trumpet, great meteor thrown into the ocean. And it says, the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. It's a huge meteor, lands in the sea from the entourage. Sea becomes like blood from the iron oxide, and a third of the sea becomes dead and ships destroyed, mainly because of the microsystem that we talked about from the algae bloom, from all the potassium in the iron oxide.
Yeah, I mean, for algae, it's it'll turn the waters red, and then the waters will turn green with the blooms, and then you'll have the microcystin. I mean, when you look at the plagues of Exodus, Wow. I mean, that
Yeah, it's a very powerful toxin.
very powerful. I mean, powerful enough that it can kill cattle and humans in sufficient concentration.
So fish or nothing, you know.
Now, I have a question with this. One of the things that we've been tracking with my science articles with the fireball activity has led me to conclude that Nemesis has what I call a Nemesis cloud. You know, our sun has the Oort cloud, which is a big ball of ice and debris. All
Okay.
right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what I'm saying is that Nemesis has its own miniature version, if you will, of an Oort cloud. And that when we pass through that, that's going to put a lot of moisture. With all of these ice particles, they're going to, of course, melt when they come in contact with the
From the heat.
atmosphere, but then they're going to condense, and now you've got a lot of rain, which explains to me the 40 days and 40 nights of Noah's flood.
Very much so. And that was another one of those passings that we feel is very explained by the passing of Nemesis or those biblical events.
But is there a correlation to that, to what you're seeing in the seven seals?
Yeah, definitely. They're because there's waters coming from the sky, and if you, it's mixed. Let's see, where was it? Water mixed with blood coming down from the sky.
Okay.
So you've got water, ice that's being melted, mixing with the iron oxide and turning into this thick, bloody substance, and it's just splattering all over the earth coming down. So this is water mixed with, and they say water mixed with blood, but they didn't understand. I mean, this is from the eye of the perspective of the person or the people that were writing it, and it's not blood. Obviously, it's iron oxide water that's thick.
Well, of course it's iron oxide, and that is what turns the water's blood red. I mean, you go to a yard and ask them, you know, how do you make those beautiful red decorative bricks? And they'll just say, yeah, we throw some iron into the usual mix, and that gives us the red. And so the same thing will happen. I mean, all of the surface water on the planet is going to be absolutely inundated with this. And what I see is areas that are slow-moving water, like swamps and sloughs. You know, those are just going to be devastated for a century. It'll take a long time for nature to clear them out. But faster-moving areas are going to restore. And frankly, if we have another 40 days and 40 nights, that would be the last major event of the flyby, and that would be a real blessing, because that would wash all this iron oxide out of surface water sources, but also new lands that rise up out of the sea that 40 days of rain, and so to speak, would flush all the salts out, and we would have entire new continents to go out and farm and rebuild from. Whereas where we're at right now,
that's right.
A lot of devastation, particularly with nuke plants. We're going to have Fukushimas going off everywhere. Is there anything you see with that correlation? Because we're going to have horrible, I mean, people have no idea of how much devastation between nuclear and fracking is going to happen to what are now beautiful inhabitable areas.
Nothing that I've seen in any texts, in any of the prophetic texts that talk about nuclear dangers, or fracking or anything of that nature, because there are. There's this one that we just read, the second trumpet, something like a great mountain burning with fire. Some people have interpreted that as an atomic bomb. I do not. I take it as a cosmological meteor that is thrown into the sea, and it's made because it's made of iron oxide that makes the sea become blood, and everything dies as a result of it. So the third trumpet's just like it. It's the wormwood meteor. The wormwood meteor falls from heaven. It says a third angel sounded, and a great star from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and the springs and waters. So this is fresh water now. The name of the star is called wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. It's just another huge meteor that falls on a third of the fresh water. It becomes like blood from the iron oxide, and people die from drinking it, which they shouldn't have drank it in the first place. But we read in the Colburn that men, vomited because and died from the putridness and the poisoned water of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, the whole picture really comes around pretty well. So it's important for people who are going to survive that, to have wells, particularly wells that are no deeper than 300 feet so they can hand pump them. I mean, what's the point of having 1,000-foot well? You're not going to have 440 service coming to you.
No, you're not.
In the tribulation, but yeah, definitely it starts to pull all the pieces together. So now the real question is, from this point forward, Dan, what should we be looking for that is a fulfillment of what you've been talking about in Revelation?
Well, okay, that's a very good point. There are some very key things that occur. If this is the sign, then there are going to be two things that are going to occur, three actually, that are going to occur very quickly. The first is we're going to have not necessarily a person, but a push toward trying to reclaim all of the properties of the world as one, into one. This is the white horse that's conquering and sent out to conquer. He's going to try to pull the world back together. And I'm going to point right now to something that you have some knowledge about, and that is the monetary reset. And that is making all countries' currency being set to a gold-backed standard. That's a good thing. That is that's something that we could say is under the auspices of the white horse, if we were to assume that was occurring. So that's one thing. Another thing is we're going to find pretty soon a world leader that's going to be probably from the Middle East, perhaps Turkey, that is going to make a covenant with Israel specifically for peace for 7 years. And he's going to allow them to rebuild the temple. That's the first thing they will do. They have been poised for years and years and years to rebuild the temple as soon as they can get the correct ground to put it on. And you and I have had discussions about whether the Temple Mount is actually the correct ground to build the temple on. But nonetheless, this is a key sign that the Jerusalem temple for the Israel will be rebuilt. That's a big key sign. Once that's done, we know that we're there. We know we're in it at that point. So those are the three signs. We're looking for things such as the monetary reform of all currencies being gold-backed and other like signs of restoring order and unity worldwide to the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're also, this is just the first things we're talking about. We're looking
Right.
for a push of a world leader that's going to bring peace and that is going to make a covenant specifically with Israel for peace in Jerusalem for 7 years and encourage them to rebuild their temple. There's your three things for us to watch for. Now, there's another thing that we can watch for in this, while in the middle of those three things. This world leader, he's going to have 10, I'm going to call them groups of authority on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 of those groups of authority are going to be merged into one. They're going to be conquered and merged into one group. So there will be 8 groups remaining, and he directly controls that one group. So he is the king or the president or the czar or whatever of that particular group. So there's a 4th thing that we can be looking for that are very key signs in the early part of the 7 years. So if this sign is correct, then we can be looking for those 4 things to occur, let's say within the next year. I'd like to give a real brief possible timeline, if I may.
Yeah.
It's very brief. I told you that each of the 4 angels on the horses had a season associated with them.
Right.
So let's remember that. Let's just say hypothetically that September 21st is the sign that begins the 7 years. Okay?
All right.
We had a blood moon in August of this year, last month. In 7 years from now, we will have another, I didn't mean a blood moon, I meant a full solar eclipse, I apologize. We will have another full solar eclipse in 7 years from now. We already know that.
All right.
So September, which is autumn of this year, we have the sign. The first seal is Gabriel. He's rule of autumn. That means that we'll see the conquering occur this autumn in the first year of the first autumn of the first year. The second seal is Raphael. He rules the spring. So he would be coming in with war in the spring of next year. And then the third seal is Uriel, the ruler of winter. He would bring in famine during the winter of next year and 2019. The fourth seal is Michael, ruler of summer. So we're talking about death coming in the summer of 2019. The midpoint is spring of the third year of the woman, which would be the spring of 2020. That's the midpoint. That's when Jerusalem will be totally destroyed. It's called the abomination of the desolation. Arrival of Nemesis is immediately afterwards. So summer of 2020 will be the first passing. This will be the beginning of the cosmological event of Nemesis. And we have the Feast of Trumpets on the 1st of Tishri, September, or the autumn, which will be the completion of the third year. I'm sorry, the completion of the fourth year.
Okay.
So this is now, we're now at the end of the fourth year from this month. And that would be the 7 trumpets. So we would see the first passing starting summer and then going through the 15 days of from the 1st to the 15th of Tishri, which would be in September or the autumn of 2020. And then the 6th seal, let's see. So that completes the fourth year. The 5th, 6th, and most of the 7th year are going to be for people taking the mark of the beast and all of the things that occur during that period of time. The second flyby will be the last month of the 7th year, which would be 2023 that we're talking about. So we're talking about the autumn of 2023 would be what I'm seeing as the second flyby. Now, if there is time, since your filler's 3 flybys, if there's time between the summer of 2020 and the actual 7 trumpets, then that could be the third passing. We could have a passing in summer of 2020. We could have another passing either in the autumn of 2020 or the autumn of 2021. And then the third passing in the autumn of 2023. And the third passing, or the last passing, whichever the case may be, is the worst. It is by far the worst in description. It also includes a earthquake such as this earth has never seen nor shall ever see again, and gross earth crust displacement and flooding, great flooding. So that's just my opinion about those. Some of those are pretty fixed. Bringing in the seasons on the 4 horses are nowhere in the Bible. That comes from the Talmud and the Zohar. The timing of the destruction of Jerusalem is pretty fixed. Whether there are 2 or 3 passings of Nemesis, I am not sure. I can tell you that one will occur probably around the summer of right after the destruction of Jerusalem, and then that would go into the 7 trumpets, or it could be a second cosmological event, an encounter with Nemesis. And then the third one will be the final month of the 7 years.
Oddly enough, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm working this out for my next book. And actually, your date's not that far off. It's going to take a couple of years for Nemesis to, it'll go through its zone of acceleration. It's still on the other side of the sun. And it has to go through the zone of acceleration. It's going to pick up speed. But it'll take a couple of years for it to at least hit the Passover phase, where maybe 21, 22, in that time frame is when we have pass outside, which will be pole shift. And then, 20, probably not long after that, we'll be transiting the tail. It could happen, that could all happen in the same year. I mean, it's just the 3 rules of premium real estate: location, location, location.
And there could be, in this only shows 2, perhaps 2 occurrences, but that doesn't mean there's not a third. The Earth goes through a lot of change after this, both metaphysically and spiritually and frequency-wise, and there's a lot of changes that occur metaphysically to the planet itself. So it could be that there's a third one that's just not in this particular part of the text, and I only see 2 of them in the portion of the text that we've looked at.
Well, if we missed the tail, that would be, if we missed the tail, that's really fortunate. That would be a nice thing.
We don't know.
Fly through the tail, we're going to have meteor showers, and then we're going to have iron oxide all over the place.
Right.
And it's going to really mess things up. But, I mean, that last event is really somewhere in that time frame. And I think it'll be as we start exiting the tail of the Nemesis system. That's when the elites are going to come up from their underground bunkers with offers of inducement. They're going to say, hey, play ball with us, take the chip, and we'll give you food, seeds, medicine, whatever. And a lot of people do that out of expediency. But the bottom line is, if enough people say no, and that'll fall flat. Humanity will be free of slavery, finally.
It will.
We'll have a new future. So that's what I'm really hoping for. It's interesting. Your timeline really parallels a lot with mine. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, we're always everybody wants to put it to a calendar. They can get a date, then that way they can say, fine, what's the billing cycle on my credit cards? And I know what to go to Costco and clear it out,
Something else, one more thing I'd like to bring up, which is encouraging.
Sure.
it has been said in the metaphysical world that the people here that are, let's say, whose allegiance are to paradise, may not experience the same thing as the people who are here that aren't. And the reason I say that is because all of the effects of Nemesis, when it passed during the Exodus, it affected everyone in Egypt, but did not affect any of the Hebrews in the swamplands. It didn't touch one of their cattle. It didn't touch one of them. None of it landed in the swamplands, but it landed everywhere else in all of the countries around them, except the swampland. There is a possibility that those who are on the right vibrational frequency, right metaphysical place, spiritual place, they may not experience the same thing as people who aren't in that place. So there may be a separation, just like there was during the passing of the Exodus.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. And there's mention of the great winnowing.
Yep.
And, you know, there's going to be a terrible, terrible hard time. And I guess essentially the winnowing is, you know, whatever's in your soul is going to be amplified 100-fold. And if what you have in your soul is some sort of fear-based emotion, then that's going to be amplified and you're not going to do very well. But if love is in your soul, that's a different thing. And, you know, that could be just a grandmother who pulls a bunch of orphans together and says, kids, let's hold hand and sing a nursery rhyme while everything on the rest of the planet is going crazy. And that's the kind of love that I think matters.
I agree. I
think those are the ones that
one of the things they said is you shall know them by their love.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to grow cold, but those that it's there, it's going to, you'll know them because of it. Yeah. There's a lot more in the all of this, but you know, we don't have to go through it all. But the big thing I want to leave you with is, I don't think there's just one encounter with the Nemesis. I think there's more than one encounter here, at least two. The first one will be in the trumpets, the 7 trumpets, and then there's going to be quite some time, and then there's another great sign in the heaven. Again, another great sign in the heavens.
Right.
But this time, instead of being a red dragon, it's 7 angels with 7 plagues. Great and marvelous. And they're the last ones because that completes the wrath of God. So if that's true, we may not see the third time, or maybe this is the third time. But it's all the bowls of wrath, and there's sores, and the sea becomes blood, and the rivers become blood, and man and the earth is scorched by the sun, a period of darkness, and Euphrates River dries up, so that this big 200-man army from the east can march over and surround Jerusalem, or right outside of Jerusalem, in this battle known as Armageddon, in a place called Har-Megiddo. And this is where there's huge flashes of lightning and peals of thunder, and the greatest earthquake that has ever been or ever shall be, supposedly. And the city is going to be split into 3 parts. And then the Messiah returns, sets foot on the ground with his army of men on white horses, and they put the beast and the false prophet in chains, and they kill everybody else, because all the rest of them are opposing them. They don't want to have anything to do with them, and they kill them. And the second reaping is complete. That's the second reaper. There was an ingathering, which is the first reaper after the 7 trumpets. At the sound of the 7th trumpet, there's an ingathering, which is a reaping by one, the first reaper. And then the second reaper is the one that pulls all of the people together at Har-Megiddo to be shot down. If they still don't want to give over the earth, then they're going to be shot down by the Messiah and his armies. So that's kind of the synopsis. There's a lot more detail. We don't need to spend the time on the detail, but yeah, I think that we are definitely going to have, if this is the sign we will have at least 2 encounters with the nemesis, along with some other things that we have to deal with, such as war and some disease and some famine and pestilence and destruction, and a lot of things happening, to a planet that's under such great warfare. We've never, in our lifetimes, and at least in the past 4,000 years, we've never seen interplanetary war on this planet. It's been some time since that's happened. So if anyone were to even consider that other beings have been on this earth, according to the Urantia, our planetary prince that was supposed to develop and watch the development of the natural evolution of man, arrived here 500,000 years ago. So somebody's been here, but that's not a point that I need to stress at all this evening.
But I got a question.
Yes, sir.
All of this is, we're not that far off from everybody starting to see objects in the Planet X system. We're already seeing it now, here and there. And it's becoming bigger, more consistent. And I'm trying to balance in my mind how it is that we're going to have all of these biblical events going on while everybody could look up in the sky and see what's coming. Yep. I mean, is this going to be that because we see it coming, we're all going to we're all going to take the mother of all stupid pills?
Can't answer that. That's, for me, it's a no-brainer. But apparently there is an entire sect of humans following this world leader that does not want for Paradise to retake control of this planet. They want it. They want to keep it. They want to keep it the way it is. They would like to keep, in my opinion, humanoids as a slave race without them knowing they're slaves, so that they can live very fruitfully off of them.
I see that. Yeah, I see.
They don't have any place. The beast, the dragon, let's say, doesn't have any other place to go. He can't go back to his former position as this incredibly glorified regent in Paradise, and he doesn't want to go back to the realm of fire, which is losing all of his identity and his personality and just becoming energy again. He doesn't want to go there. His option is he's got to have some place to live, and he really likes this planet, and he's pretty powerful compared to the humanoids that live here, and his ability to possess and to control and to deceive far exceeds our ability to do so, because we're just not millions or billions of years old. We just don't know. We haven't even been here for 500,000 years, so we get 70 or 80 or 90 years to try to learn something, and we typically don't pass that on to the next person. They have to learn it all on their own again in the next year of your progeny, or next generation of your progeny. So they've got a lot of tricks that we don't know about. They've got a lot of technology we don't know about. They've got a lot of instrumentation that we don't know about. And if you look, and you well know a lot of what goes on in the military complex underground, in the deep underground military bases, about mind control and about being able to telepathically speak into people's brains, making them think that they are listening to the voice of God without anyone around them audibly speaking. Things like this, technology like this, is going to really shape, perhaps, the future during this 7 years of tribulation, whenever that should occur.
Well, it's going to be one hell of a ride.
It is. It is. We can get excited about it, but it is going to be a rough ride. It really is. And we may suffer loss. We may suffer injury. We may suffer death. But we can't give up, and we can't just freak out. We need to prepare in every way that we possibly can, and try to help everybody around us that we possibly can, to prepare. So there's a shop up in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and they also build underground bunkers for people. And their attitude is so good. They say, call us anytime. We're not going to charge you. Our goal is to help as many people as we can in the time that we have before it's too late. And that's got to be our goal, is we're trying to help equip people before it gets here, should this really be the sign, and so that they're aware and that they have a chance and that they can start preparing. And I really appreciate all your efforts and what you're doing to try to make good information available to the people, Marshall.
Well, it's my mission, Dan, and I'm in it for the species. I want to see us have a Star Trek future.
I agree.
And I think there are a lot of other benign races out there that would like to see us as such, not as a bunch of Anunnaki stormtroopers out to steal and plunder whatever we're told to steal and plunder. And yeah, we're at a fork in the road here, and it's much bigger than the disasters and the catastrophes we're going to experience as a species. Humanity is going to have a very fundamental choice. Are we going to kick?
Time to get off the fence, isn't it?
Huh?
Time to get off the fence, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Just reach for that brass ring. It's like the Hopi prophecy rock. We keep going the way we're going, not so good. We take the high path, things get a lot better.
A lot better. That's right.
So we have that choice. We're at that. This is the most pivotal point, I think, for everybody who's alive to see this coming. This is in the history of our species. This will be remembered as a turning point. And,
yeah.
So
Definitely.
It really is about being in it for the species. I mean, with 7 to 10 years of tribulation, however you want to measure it, if it's me and mine prepping and, the rest of the world can go hang themselves and I'm going to survive for the sake of survival, you're going to die.
It is going to be a change of everything, of the thing the way we know it,
right.
But it's a rebirth of something that can be far greater.
Exactly. And I just see this as in, when things are at their worst, we're at our best, and I could just see that happening. You know what I'm really looking forward to? I mean, during the tribulation, you're not going to have all these special interests sitting in front of the patent office waiting for a prototype that really works to come through the door so that they can send their government goons out there to shut it down and steal it and make the poor schmo miserable. I mean, just imagine no more elites in controlling the patent office front door. All of a sudden, we have Nikola Teslas popping up all over the place, 0 point energy, healing, all kinds of things that just, I can see a renaissance of human innovation in the midst of all this, because I see that what's coming is going to break the shackles of control. And we're really going to be free to achieve our potential. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I see the dark cloud coming. Yeah, it's dark. It's dark. But I also see the silver lining. So do you.
Yes, I do. So I do not fret. And that's specifically what Jesus said is, do not be afraid. These things must come to pass. And I can't come back until they do. But he is coming back. So.
Yeah, it's like when a dentist says open wide. It's not going to be fun for a while, but once you're off the chair, it's going to be better.
Well, brother, I guess I can leave you for the evening. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you letting me share. And if we need to come back and revisit some of this or any more detail, I am always available.
Thank you, bro. I really appreciate it. God bless.
God bless.
Live
See you
long
later.
and prosper.
There you go.